1,000 years ago, a king sat at the edge of the ocean and ordered the tide to stop. And what happened next is exactly what happened to your mortgage rate this week. What's up, everybody? Ruben Chavez, Too Strong Mortgage. Happy Monday to the week, and let's go ahead and get started on this video. So last Wednesday, you guys know that the Federal Reserve held interest rates, right? No change. Every headline in America said the same four words: Fed leaves rate unchanged. 3 days later, the average 30-year mortgage rate closed at 6.83%, within 0.02% of its highest that it's been all year. So the Fed still held, and your interest rate for mortgage went up. My take on this, I guess, everybody in this country is watching the wrong guy. The Fed does not decide what you pay, and there's a 1,000-year-old story that proves this. The guy's name in the story? Knut. King Knut the Great is what they called him. Ruled England for 40 years, plus Denmark and Norway. One of the most powerful men alive. And this guy, he had a court full of flatterers, right? Guys who basically told him that he was so majestic. He was so great. The sea itself would obey him. And of course, the king knew that this was garbage, and Knut called their bluff. What King Knut did was he had him carry him in the throne, okay, down to the shore, right? He sat down. As the tide started coming in, he commanded the water, "Do not touch me," right? He said, "Don't touch him." Then, of course, all of a sudden the tide comes in. His feet start to get wet. His robe starts to get wet. He allowed the water to go so long that eventually his throne was soaked, all right? And here's the part that nobody gets. Knut knew it was going to happen. He didn't believe the hype, all right? He wasn't so arrogant. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to embarrass the men who told him that he was this great. Literally, he turned to his court, soaking wet, and told them the power of kings is empty, that no man commands the elements. Now, you fast forward, okay, and this part of the story is a legend, but a monk named Henry of Huntington wrote down about 100 years after Knut died, might have happened, right? Apparently, we've been telling it backwards all these years. Apparently, they say that King Knut now means a fool who thought he could stop the ocean. He was the only man on that beach who actually knew he couldn't stop the ocean at the time, and they twisted it backwards. So what does any of this have to do with your mortgage, right? Well, an economist named Irving Fisher answered that in 1930 in his book called The Theory of Interest. In this book, the economist says that the rate a lender charges you is the real cost of the money, okay, plus whatever inflation that lender is afraid of course. And what that means is that nobody lends you money for 30 years based on what things cost today. They lend based on what they're scared of, what things will cost in 2040, let's say. And that fear is not a vote that the Fed gets to partake in. So maybe let me give you another example on how the two bridge, okay? Because this happened in 2004. June 2004, Alan Greenspan, the Fed chairman then, he starts raising rates, okay? And they don't stop raising rates. They actually raised rates 17 straight meetings in a row. The Fed funds rate went from 1% all the way up to 5.25%. The textbook of economics on this says that long-term mortgage rates will follow the same trajectory. Mortgage money will start to get more expensive because of the Fed moves. Instead, what happened was long-term yields fell about 0.5% in the middle of all that tightening. February 16th, 2005, Greenspan sits down in front of the Senate Banking Committee, and I'm going to read to you exactly what he says. For the moment, the broadly unanticipated behavior of world bond markets remains a conundrum. Bond prices movements may be the short-term aberration, but it will be some time before we are able to get a better judgment of the forces underlying recent experiences. Translation, he's got no idea. None. 17 straight rate hikes, and the most powerful central banker on earth just told the United States Senate, beats the hell out of me, ask me again next year. And the Fed, or the Fed chair, or the Fed, is said to command the tide. But the tide did whatever it wanted. And cheap 30-year mortgage money kept pouring into the housing market, and it created the market running way too hot. And we all know what happens pretty much when the market's too hot. Which brings us to this week, Wednesday, July 29th. The Fed holds at 3.5 to 3.75%. but the vote was 9-3, and all three of the dissenters wanted to raise. Chairman Kevin Warsh, his one line to reporters was, "I asked for a good family fight, and I got one." The bond market heard family fight, and it started selling. Okay, the 30-year Treasury jumped to 5.2%, the highest since July of 2007. The 10-year finished Friday around 4.75%, the highest since January 2025. And your rate, it follows the 10-year Treasury, not the Fed. Lenders got scared about inflation. Scared lenders demand more yield. More yield on that 10-year means more on your mortgage rate. 6.83% on Friday. Okay, Freddie Mac's weekly survey printed 6.66%. That's a one-year high. And the Fed did not move a thing. 42 days between meetings, and Warsh gets up and says this quote, "Nominal and real yields are materially higher across the Treasury curve. Some of the increases in the market interest rates between FOMC meetings are amongst the most significant in the last 2 decades." Again, translation. One of the 10 biggest moves between meetings in 20 years, and the Fed didn't do a thing about anything. They didn't do anything, and that still happened. Then he asked the exact question this whole video is about, okay? Bear with me. His words, "But if the committee didn't change its policy rate, what happened?" And then the Fed answers, "Market participants are learning to play the ball, not the referee." The chairman of the Federal Reserve just called himself a referee. And then he followed up with this: "The central bank need not always and everywhere be the center of attention." I do love that, I won't lie. That's King Knut, okay? That's him soaking wet, telling the court that the power of kings is empty. 1,000 years later, same speech. Translation again, even the king can't control everything. Last week, I told you that the Fed was the wrong scoreboard. This week, the scoreboard proved it. Now, let me be straight with you, though. I don't know which way this thing's going to go. Friday, we have jobs reports. If weak numbers come in, the cooling argument starts to win, and yields typically come down. If hot numbers come in, or hot wages, then those three dissenters the three dissenters from the Fed, they get a whole lot louder. CPI hits the following Wednesday after that. And not to mention, there's heavy talks about actual, now I'm not saying peace, but negotiations actually coming to a head with Iran and Trump. And anybody who tells you that they know what's going to happen next is guessing or lying to you at best. But again, here's the thing. We don't need the Fed forecast. Okay, we need to stop watching for a king to save us. We should build in good, bad, or even in uncertain times. We should be able to make a sound judgment whether the tide is in or whether the tide is out. No king or Fed chair could control what happens next if we all just keep a growth mindset. That was a long one. And with that, please remember, life's not meant to be, it's meant to create. Too strong.